Welcome back to the Pastors Podcast. Pastors Scott and Jim here.
Yes.
How are you, Jim?
I have my coffee. I'm okay.
What time in the morning do you start drinking coffee?
Well, unfortunately, I have to postpone it until after I walk the dog because his needs are greater than mine. So usually I walk the dog about 5:30. I usually have my first cup around 7.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'd have it earlier if I possibly could. Believe me.
You walk the dog at 5:30.
I walk the dog at 5:30.
I'm telling you, every conversation I have with dog owners does not make me.
No, I do not. I do not.
I mean, at this point, it's probably well established. Everybody probably knows this about me, but wow.
I think, this sounds maybe a little gross for the podcast, but I think we should breed a dog with the larger bladder to make it through more than just, the first hours of the night.
Oh my goodness.
That would be helpful. But
the riveting content that people have come to expect here at the Pastors Podcast. Well, yes. Jim and his dog aside.
Yes.
How long have you had this particular dog?
Let's see. Since he is just 6 months old, so about 8.5 years now.
I thought it had been a while.
Yeah. It seems like, seconds, but it's going on forever as far as I can tell. I'm not sure he's ever going to die. He just likes it here, and so we'll just keep going. Yeah, he's older, but he's very perky, and he pretty much rules the house like most dogs do.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, as I was saying before, I interrupted myself. Aside from the history of Jim's dog, we are here for Cornerstone History, Volume 6. This is our 6th episode on this, Jim, and we've been tracing the history of Cornerstone Church since its inception in 1901 as the First Baptist Church of Sawtell. And if you haven't listened, you can catch up on all those on the podcast. But today we are covering essentially the aughts. Is that correct? Like 2000, 2010?
We did 2000 to 2008, 7, somewhere there. I think we're starting this one at 2010. Wait a minute. I can look at my notes and see if I can figure this out.
No, okay. So to back us up, Paul Edwards was the previous senior pastor.
That's correct.
And he was here until the late 90s.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
in 1999, that's when Jerry came, right?
Jerry came in 1999.
Yeah. And
which
left in 2010.
Happens to be the year I graduated high school.
Oh, it's okay. Well,
we do you know how many times we played the song Party Like It's 1999 that year? Like, as the graduating class of 99, it was, anyways, it's still stuck in my head.
Okay.
To this day. But okay. But maybe to take a quick step back, Jerry Wilke came and was called here as the senior pastor in 1999. Paul Edwards had left, though, a couple of years before that, or a few years.
That's right, a couple of years before that.
And so the space in between was your longest stint as a interim senior pastor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I wasn't. It seemed like decades, but I think it was quite a long time. But
what were those years? What were those years like for you in the late 90s between Paul Edwards' retirement or leaving and Jerry Wilke coming?
Well, it's odd. They were very, very difficult for a lot of reasons. I think we had some crises in the congregation, which is not unusual. That's what churches do a lot. We had some governing issues we were trying to work through, how we would want to reorder things. There was some unrest that was just beginning that would get worse later, and some division which had begun but wasn't really critical at that point between sort of the older and the generation and the younger one coming up. That became a key issue, but it was just beginning. For the most part, I think people gave me grace as an interim pastor, and we seemed to do well. We were growing and we were financially okay. I think one of the issues, there are several issues in that time. One of them was, what do we do with our rental properties? They were aging. Some people wanted to just trash them all.
So for context,
yes,
the there were some bungalow style small apartments on our property.
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So where the parking lot is now, we had some older apartments. And they were little bitty ones. They were the kind where you have 2 rows of little apartments and a kind of a garden area in the middle, and like real 1920s style. And then down on the further on this block,
like where the green space is now.
Where the green space is now.
Yeah.
We had 2 sets of apartments. One was 3 small, really shabby apartments, and then we had 2 more and a garage on that street. And we used one of those for housing a youth pastor at one point as part of his salary, which gave us some grace. And the ones up here, during this at the end of the Vietnam War, we used some of those for Vietnamese refugees coming to America. And then we continued to use them for people who were kind of down and out, or college students who were struggling, or we used them more for ministry than we did for income. But that, I think, proved a problem because the upkeep on them was expensive, and so money was going out but not coming back in. So it was a kind of a controversy. Some people wanted to get rid of them, some people liked to use them, and some people wanted to make money off of them, and that kind of was a continuing growling point.
Well, what an interesting. That is a fact I didn't know. I knew about the apartments. But I didn't know that they were used. I knew that one was used kind of as a missionary house for people on furlough, right?
Yes, right.
But the one was used for a youth pastor at a time, or a youth leader. I also didn't know that they were used for Vietnamese refugees for a time.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought that was great, and it was they were grateful, sweet people, and came to church. They knew very little English, but they really worked hard to listen to the sermons and make sense of it. And
I mean, it's the type of thing that we wish we could do now, right? I mean, we wish we had housing for Iranian refugees, right? For number of people that, but interesting. And so, okay, but logistically, this is why every new idea we come up with, Jim, you're like, well, I've seen that done. But I was shedding you more and more light, Jim, on all of our interactions.
I keep hoping it'll work this time, However,
but during this time, there were a lot of differences and began being tension because the upkeep of these apartments was difficult and we didn't have the income for them. And so this was just one of the tension points for in the life of the church.
Yes. And I think it was taken up by people who had other tension points to work on. So some of these, grew as one issue, then became another issue. The deeper issue was the cultural divide in our age groups, and that was something that actually in the Wilke era was really fought out, and it moved us to crisis. But we tried to address that during the time. It was an obvious issue. The older generation simply could not continue the church. They were older, they were going to the point where they couldn't really help. And the younger generation didn't tend to want to go to a church where it was mostly ruled by the older people. So that was, I think, the Wilke years were primary for that particular crisis.
So, okay, so it was into that scenario that Jerry and Janelle Wilke came in. So for those, I mean, probably the majority of people listening that never knew or never met Jerry or his wife Janelle, what was Jerry Wilke like?
He's a great guy. He's a terrific guy. He was very funny. He was a witty jokester. I shouldn't say is, but was when he was here certainly. He was closely connected to in the Valley, John
MacArthur.
Had served on I think the board of directors for the school out there. Was very close. He had pastored for 10 years in Arvada, Colorado. Right. Done very well there. Had a good church. Wanted to come back to California. He was a sailor. He had a boat, and he and his wife loved to sail. And there just wasn't that much water, and there's no ocean in Colorado.
It's a little bit problematic.
So here, he loved the idea that he was, within a few miles of the marina where he could stage his boat. So I think that was one way we sort of sucked him into this, even though he knew it was kind of messy here. So that's good. But just a great guy, just funny, smart. Willing to work with just about any situation and try to work it out, and good in the pulpit too. He was a very, very good teacher.
Yeah, an incredible teacher.
Yeah.
So a little bit anecdotal. So Jerry was the first pastor of First Baptist that I ever knew. That was my initial connection to the church here, and I met Jerry because I was up at Cornerstone in Simi Valley. And we had just started Eternity Bible College, and he came up to teach a class on pastoral ministry, on just the logistics of pastoral ministry, and weddings and funerals, and oh my goodness, had he done a lot of weddings and funerals and specific, and just kind of the logistics. And so I was in seminary at the time, and thought, man, I really want to sit in on this class and glean from. I'd heard such great things about him, and so got to know him there, sat in on the class and got to know him there. And then when Laura and I moved down here to West LA to plant Shoreline, he was one of the few people I knew in this area, and he and Janelle took us under their wing, and would take us out and check in on us, take us out to lunch, and just make sure we were doing all right as new people to West LA as a young pastor. I felt that incredible. I mean, he just had an incredible care for people and investment in others. I was so blessed by that personally. And then when I was looking for a job as the church was starting, I asked him if he knew anybody that was hiring, and he connected me to the school here. That's how I ended up teaching PE here for a couple of years. My first couple of, that's a whole other story. But maybe that's the beginning of Shoreline story we'll tell next. But anyways.
Probably the beginning of your gray hair growing.
That was quite an experience.
Yes, indeed.
But both Jerry and Janelle are so, I know that for so many of the First Baptist people that are still here, a part of Cornerstone, that were a part of First Baptist, they meant a lot to them as well.
Yeah. You also worked closely with Kevin Elwell, who was here at that time, who was our youth pastor.
Yeah, and so Kevin, because we taught together when and that's where I got to know him. But he came a few years after Jerry, or did they come in at the same time? I thought he came a little bit later.
You may be right. I've forgotten.
Okay,
can't remember which came first.
Yeah, because I think it was only like 2004, 2005 by the time Kevin came.
Okay.
From Guam, but anyways. So Jerry comes in 1999, and what were the dynamics of the church like in those years?
It was still, what's the word, restive, I guess. It was there was still this growing discomfort in the church that was a generational frustration, I guess. That there is a bit of an older feel to the leadership of the church, and kind of a sense that if you're young, you have to apprentice to get in, or something like that. It's a little hard to put a finger on it because it was seen differently from the two sides.
Okay, so I've got I don't know, maybe an embarrassing question, but so Jerry's significantly older than me. And so I always thought of him as older. What, for the older guard here, was he old enough?
Yeah, he was
Did they see him as one of them?
not exactly.
Okay.
No, they did not. And because he was younger than many.
He was. See,
And,
exactly. I think my assumption was like, oh yeah, he was that age, but he probably wasn't. He was probably
Yeah.
in his
early 40s, 50, no, middle
50s.
40s, 50s.
Yeah, but that was still younger.
Yeah,
than-
they're still younger.
Yeah. Interesting.
And and the idea was, let's get someone younger,
yeah.
but no, it wasn't young enough.
He still had white hair.
Yes.
He's
So he came in knowing that there were issues, but willing to work on those and thinking that he could work them out. And it turned out that this situation he was the one it blew up in his face more than him being able to move it forward. He began to bring the younger group into the leadership of the church, leadership positions.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to necessarily be in that. We had all these boards and committees. They didn't want to necessarily do that. That wasn't what their leadership thought was. And we also started a separate worship service on Saturday nights for people who were younger. But it wasn't really set up right. It wasn't funded well. Two of us, I was one of the people in charge of that. We needed a lot more kind of room to maneuver and more of a budget to be able to put that together. It went well for a while, but it didn't continue. And that was a real frustration point, I think, for several who were coming into the church, that it was like, all right, you guys aren't willing to let go.
Okay, so I want to get into some of those. We can kind of come back to some of those tension points and where that ended up leading. But what were some of the highlights of the life of the church in the early 2000s? What was it that during those years, maybe, and Jerry's time here, most encouraged or excited you?
I liked working. It was called The Growing Place, the Saturday night thing. I liked that and worked, really well with it. I think I felt caught a bit in a positional crossfire. At that point, I was counseling. That's what I had been doing, and then the sense was, do we really need a counselor here at this point? And trying to begin to pull me into ministry, but that was also awkward. Just where do I do that, and how do I do that? So I felt, I think, stretched and not clearly focused on anything, either by direction or by my attempts to move forward. So Saturday night was, for me, I think, a lot of fun. I really greatly enjoyed that, but I could see that it wasn't being set up right or funded right, and so it was beginning to lose its momentum rather quickly.
So I get the sense. I mean, I think there was probably some real encouragement there, and some also obviously some tensions. But I got the sense, looking back, that those years, those early 2000s, was a time where, even though these tensions existed, that younger people were still, maybe not in droves, but there were still younger people being drawn into the life of the church. Yes. The church was also, it seems to me, becoming increasingly multi-ethnic.
Yes.
What was the main kind of impetus for that? Just Jerry's preaching and the quality of his preaching? Were there other dynamics going on?
I think there were. I don't want to denigrate his teaching. His teaching was great. I think he was is a very good and clear teacher, a good preacher. That I think that part went well. Most of the people came, I think, the only complaint was that sometimes it was, people would say that it's over my head. I can't, it's too, complicated for me to understand. But I think for West LA, that for many people that was good. I think this is not a place where like fundamental stuff goes. Where people around here are fairly highly educated. We also had churches of other groups here at the same time. So
meeting on
yeah,
campus.
meeting on campus,
That's right.
using our rooms. So that made a big difference because it meant that people who were bilingual could cross over from one service to the other, and often did, or bring in their children who spoke more English than they spoke Spanish or Vietnamese or whatever. And so in those ways, it worked very well. There weren't a whole lot of those people, so that was a smaller group, but it seemed to be very kind of urban in that way that people could come in and be a part of it, even though they were not, from here in the most strict sense of that.
Yeah,
that worked.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I see that. I mean, I see in so many of the things that the Lord is doing now, maybe ways that weren't as engaged or kind of integrated together in different seasons, but they were echoes. There was precursors to what the Lord was doing here and now. And I know that was a time. That was the time Will Bredberg was here as well, right?
Yes,
he was here as a pastor.
As a pastor-dentist.
Pastor-dentist. I was going to say, like, part-time pastor, right? Yeah. He worked as a dentist and served as a pastor. And, it's, it's the same non-vocational, bivocational, effort. I mean, because I even think back to some of the young marrieds group at that time had people in it that are now, right? Jose and Becky Gonzalez were a part of that at one point, and now pastoring here. Reggie and Nicole Austin were a part of that. He's now pastoring here. Zach and Ginger Nix were a part of that, First Baptist, and as a part of the church plant, right there. And there's just echoes from that season that I see the Lord's kind of faithfulness through maybe some of those tensions. I feel like that was a result of between whether it was you, Will, Jerry, an intentional investment in younger people that said, hey, I know this isn't all like an easy landing spot for you, but we do want to disciple you and help make you more like Jesus, and that's borne fruit. That's at least the way that I reflect on it from the outside. How would you? Yeah,
I would agree with it. With what you just said. I think you're right. We had a willing population coming in, and we also, I mean, the great thing about this church since basically its inception has been its emphasis on missions and sending people out. We had people at that point, even though they were older, around the world, in all kinds of crazy places. Doing all kinds of things, and they would come back and they would stand up and they would say, we're here doing this on Sunday morning, and I think that was a huge influence on the very people you're talking about, and others that I may not know or we may not know who maybe moved to another church and went off from there. I know at least a couple of people who moved, and then another church picked them up because they wanted to go on the missions field and sent them out. So it spread. Yeah. So I think we did a lot more good. I mean, I think at that point I was working pretty hard to alleviate the bad. I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to what the good things were.
That's why I'm here, just going to draw it out of you, Jim. We're gonna get there.
I'm the worrywart here at the table.
Yeah, we'll get to your we'll get in maybe in the next story. We'll get to your cautious pessimism.
Okay, yeah.
Soon enough, but I mean, so it's interesting to see the Lord's work, his redemptive work, and even the ways in which disciples were being made, prepared, supported, and in some ways even sent out during a season where there was still a lot of kind of long-term tension that had not been resolved.
Yeah.
quite
Well
yet.
said. Yeah.
What so eventually Jerry retired.
He actually
What led to that?
He moved to another church. Actually, he
Oh,
didn't
okay.
retire.
Oh, okay.
But it was
Oh, he moved to Hemet.
yeah,
That's right. And
that's
okay,
right.
it's all coming back.
Yeah, came from Colorado, went to Hemet. I think it's like went from heaven. No, I won't say that. It was cold in Colorado. It was very hot in Hemet. I think for him, the struggles that began to grow became almost impossible to overcome at some point. We initiated a constitution revision, which became a new constitution altogether, pretty much. But at the same time, there was a growing sense that this situation is unsatisfactory. It's still the older generation in charge. We need to force the church into either a change or into maybe just kicking people out or something. And that began to focus down to a couple of our boards in the board system that we had 5 major boards. And then it began to focus primarily on one board, which was the most powerful board, the Board of Trustees. And that's when it became a real difficult time.
And so it's my understanding that during that time, Jerry was trying to move the church to more of an elder-led model.
Yes.
To an elder-led model.
To an elder-led model.
And had taught, was teaching on that, had, groups of potential elders and working through that. And that essentially was the maybe crux or most controversial change in the new proposed constitution. Is that true, or was there more to it than that?
I would say there's more to it.
Okay.
That was part of it, but the issue became one of a few people who really began to believe, or maybe they didn't believe, but they taught that the pastors were really not in charge of the church, and that there was a board of directors, and like all institutions, the board of directors is in charge, and the pastors are employees. And that began to be a huge controversy. Who makes the decisions about these things? And that's where we were in the process of being examined by an outside institution. We were working to redo the Constitution to make it board free, which we are at now. But that's where we were starting. And at the same time, we were struggling with the boards that we had, and one board in particular.
So, in the midst of all of that, after working towards that end, Jerry took another church.
Yeah.
And before that was all kind of finalized, I think he didn't feel like he was going to be the one to be able to finally make that change.
Yeah.
So what happened then?
A whole lot. Jerry told me well, there was something. One is he didn't need that trauma in his life. That it's hard to explain how much that messes with your home life and your attitude and your ability to carry on and to preach the word and to move into people's lives helpfully. But it does. It just people get into pastoring, I think, with the idea of telling people about Jesus, helping people live their lives before Jesus, but not being corporate leaders who have to fight corporate battles. The board that opposed him, I think, was a excellent board, a really excellent board. The the people on that board were people who were highly trained in business world, legal world, and so forth. And so I think their sense of how an organization worked was very different, and they saw the struggle we were going through as well. We had a company come in and evaluate us at one point, and they wrote up quite a thick evaluation.
Like a church consulting.
Yes.
Was this after Jerry had left?
No, it was commissioned, I think, the summer before he left.
Okay.
And the report came out in like right after Christmas or something, right after first of the year. I'm not quite sure, but somewhere in there. It very distinctly pointed out that we're a divided church, that we're a church that's really struggling, and we're a church where there is a generational, there seems to be a generational conflict, and it's fairly significant, and that the church needed to make significant changes. So it seemed to support the people who were becoming opposed to Jerry's leadership. And I think I should say Jerry's and my leadership. I was supporting Jerry at that time. But I don't think that was actually what the report said. However, it was interpreted that way.
It was interpreted as a serious change is needed.
Yes.
And the interpretation then was, we need a new CEO.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, we need somebody with a younger, clearer, more modern direction. It was a thicker. I got it in front of me right now, and they asked people for comments, and some people made quite lengthy comments about these issues. Since they were anonymous, we didn't have any way of knowing who was saying them. But about 2/3 of the reports were like, it's a wonderful church, love being here, da 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 da. And then about 1/3, or maybe a quarter even, were like, we really need to get this whole generational thing changed altogether. So on the main, that was fairly discouraging, and I think that played into the sense that this wasn't going to go away, and this needed to be dealt with in a way that gets me, if I'm Jerry, off of the fire tied to the post. So at some point he felt like it was not only affecting him, but Janelle, his wife and family, and that he needed to move. And I don't blame him. I think he'd made the right decision. I wouldn't have done that either.
Okay.
However,
so which I was going to say, which I mean, I completely respect, and I think that was absolutely makes sense, the right decision.
Oh gosh, yes.
But Jim, that's not the decision you made. you didn't go at that same time as well.
No, I did not.
you stuck here, and you ended up, and I mean, not just like kind of passively or along the way, but you picked up this mantle in order to take these needed changes in the life of the church across the finish line to essentially put the church in a position where it needed to choose what kind of church it was going to be going forward. Why did you make that choice?
That's a really good question. I don't really know. I think that one is I felt like I couldn't. You can't just walk away. What happens at that point?
Well, and what's interesting here, I'm sorry, I want you to continue, but what strikes me is also we tell the story of these senior pastors that had gotten hired and come and served for a while. But you were in a different position.
That's true.
You'd been here all along.
Yeah.
This was more than really for any of them, your church family, and had been your, through all of it, right? Through the beginning and through your, the death of your wife, through your remarriage, through all the ups and downs, and the entirety of your pastoral ministry was here. That's right. It does take on a different color to me.
Does it? Okay. I don't think I was thinking of those things. I think I was thinking, we need to walk this through to conclusion some way. This is long history of this institution here on the side. It does need to change, and in some sense, they are right. This is stuck, and that's what that report showed that we got. Beyond that, we had, I think it wasn't just me. We had a team here, like Kevin Elwell was, I think, a huge part of the team. What can't I think his name? The teacher from, I'm blanking on all the names, the college where you, the guy who preached here occasionally.
Mackey.
Yes.
Dr. Mackey.
Dr. Mackey. Was a huge help to me, talking me through this and saying, you don't want to walk away from this if you possibly can.
And he served during those years as an interim preacher.
He would teach on weekdays and come over here and preach on Sundays when we needed.
And so he wasn't a part of the weekly life, but he would preach on Sundays.
But he was very, very involved with what was here. Really liked this church. Did that for years, even as a substitute. And then when Jerry left, he came in fairly frequently. He and I think a couple of other, Kevin and we got about four of us shared the pulpit. But he was frequently here and really, really liked this church. And he really, really thought that the instigators of this particular move, who were, it was one board in the church, as I mentioned, about 4 people, maybe 5, were seriously wrong in the way they were approaching this, particularly in their theology. They were not pastors, they were not theologians, but they had written a book or a tome that they put out and passed out to the congregation. And he felt very upset about that. And he said to me that he told them when they gave him the packet, and he read it through, "This is heresy. This is really written heresy. You don't understand what you've done." Which I thought was a powerful statement about why we ought to push back. So I thought, what are you going to do, fire me? It's happened before, so, you survive that. But I should stay and try.
Those were hard years.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't sleep much during that time.
No.
That's true.
What were... looking back, I mean, and maybe this is an unfair statement, but were those the hardest for you?
Good question. Probably. Yeah. There were a couple of times before that where, I think just church life is so interesting because it's based on, I think, a whole different concept of how you run an organization from anything else in our culture. So we talk about profit, or we talk about service, or we talk about effectiveness. Scripture talks about obedience. And I think we don't deal with that very well. I think I was learning that somehow this is a change of the church to the culture we're in, rather than changing the culture we're in to understand the church's perspective. So it seemed like a battle worth fighting. So I think that's why I stayed.
It's so interesting. I think there's so many ways we can make it more complicated than that, right? And want to psychoanalyze every angle of it. I feel the temptation to, but I think in some ways that there was a simple sense of calling and obedience to what the Lord had put before you, and that is really at its core what life following Jesus is most fundamentally about.
Yeah, I think that we were caught on a hook that people had been in charge for so long, and that hook was wrong, but the solution provided for it by those who disagreed was more wrong.
Mm.
And the need was to redo more toward a biblical standard goal. And that's, I think, that's what the Constitution revision was about.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to litigate all the specifics of of the difficulty of that and everything there's no need to, but I think that the core disagreement, I think we've identified the core conviction. You believed that and many believed in what was best for the church, being led and shepherded by pastors, going forward was worth, it was to you striving for a resolution to, and even if I think it seemed to me like there's a part of you that said that this needs to get resolved one way or another.
Yeah.
Right. And in order for the church to move forward.
Yeah.
So how, in the end, well, again, we don't need to get bogged down in the mess.
No.
Not in this format. How did it resolve?
Well, we Jerry put together a group of us, and we both studied Scripture, and then we wrote a new Constitution. We did it at one of the trustees, who was also an ordained pastor, Steve Campbell, did it at his house, and we took it out of the church and wrote it over there. And then we brought it back to the church and proposed that we change the Constitution in these ways rather than the ways that were being proposed. Then we had to get that cleared by the boards and committees in the present Constitution, so we had to go through a structure of that. And that was a long, involved fight because the people that opposed were already on a couple of the boards. So there was this kind of a pre-battle battle. But it passed by one vote. And we're talking summer of 2009 or 2010. I've forgotten which one.
I think it's 2010.
2010, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So our relationship had grown during this time, and we were just engaged in conversations and prayer and support for one another. And we're going to tell that story. We're going to kind of take a step back to tell a bit of that story next in the next, or at least in a future episode. But will you elaborate on that final vote and how it was experienced by you, how it unfolded, and how it was experienced? It's just, I think I would, if you don't mind, I would love for you to share a little bit of kind of how the moment of resolution there.
Okay, well, it started, I guess, back the summer before when we were having meetings, and there was this constant back and forth, and a great deal of talk going around, a great deal of criticism. People would stop me and say, "Why are you putting the church through this?" Or "Why don't you just do what they're?" I mean, there are all kinds of ways of trying to figure out how we can get out of this little skirmish, and it continued through the summer into the fall and got I think much more intense. But when we finally came to the vote, which was in November, I think right around Thanksgiving somewhere. It was very difficult just even to come into work. It was very difficult to come to church altogether. The people who were objecting would be in the congregation, and it was very difficult to get up and preach. They were there, and it was really, I think, a very, very tense situation for me anyway, and sadly for my wife. But we just kept. Several people said, "You should just leave. If you leave, then the controversy will settle down." I just didn't think that was what we were called to do, so I just didn't. We got to the day of the vote, and I assumed that we would lose. And it was a paper ballot, and we were in the gymnasium, and I was I already had my office packed up,
You did?
ready to
Really?
go. Yeah. I had the assumption, and so we have a judge in the church, Paul Turner, wonderful guy, and he was the mediator, the moderator, one who kind of acted like the referee. And so he comes out and announced the vote, and we had won it substantially. And I immediately assumed that he had said that we had lost, which is what I expected him to say. So I started to leave the room and go get my stuff, and my sweet wife came to me and said, "Did you hear? You won." I said, "What?" And so I went over to look at the numbers, and we actually won the vote.
So the final vote was not, you didn't win the final vote by one vote.
No,
that was some of the maybe committees.
There was the biggest committee we won by one vote.
Got it.
But the final vote we won by a substantial margin.
Which made it clear what the church, where the church wanted to head.
Where the church was.
Yeah, where the church was and where it wanted to head.
And who they trusted. And I was standing at the microphone saying, okay, so if this is the case, because we had made no plans for what to do next. Why should we?
Wait, you were so sure you were going to lose?
Yeah.
You packed up your office and hadn't made any plans.
No plans for what to do now.
This is the Jim Leonard way of living. My goodness.
So I thought, oh, great. We got to figure out now what to do. So I said, okay, we're going to have to put together another committee to work out how we're going to make the change here. So we'll get on this right away, but and just kind of doing that. And while I'm doing that, the 5 people who were on this board that opposed us came up one by one and handed me their resignations, which stunned me. I thought they would fight back, but they all 5 handed me their resignations that day and left the church never to return. And that was stunning, which meant we had a clear path from there on. And we still had some people who were opposed, but the leaders were all gone. So that was I think the point at which I thought, this is for real. We have to really kick in and do this now. And so we set a date like next March or something like that. I think it was Easter. We were going to say, all right, by Easter we need to have a constitution now that is an interim, and then by Easter we need to be able to change over to this new way of governance. And I just felt like I just been resurrected somehow. That's what I felt. I went and unpacked my office.
Maybe you actually got some sleep.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I don't think so. I think it was a couple of days before I could settle down and sleep. But yeah, it was amazing.
Wow. And I mean, and obviously looking back now, this was one of the first significant dominoes that in the end, in the Lord's sovereignty, led to the merging of our churches together.
Yes.
And which is its own kind of story. But I think that vote was in a way the end of this era.
Yes.
And the beginning of a transition into a new one. That and really, I mean, in a lot of ways, and the church every church has tension in every season, but seems like it was kind of the closure of and the resolution of this tension that had been, especially among leadership, that had been building for years. I mean, now I guess looking back, even decades, as you reflect on it.
Yes.
It's amazing to see the Lord's faithfulness in that.
It totally. It was a Dr. Thomas moment. We talked some time back about Dr. Thomas, who and the warriors, and this we're talking way back to World War II, wrote the Constitution that we were under. It was a great Constitution for those days. I just had this image of Dr. Thomas, saying, yes, this is not that era. This is the new era. Write a new Constitution. And so, I mean, I had a couple of people say to me, Dr. Thomas would be shocked and appalled with you. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. I think pretty much the opposite.
Interesting. What a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
What a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim.
Thanks.
I appreciate your willingness to share it. I appreciate your the humility and carefulness with which you share it. I think some of the most I know that some of the most personally difficult dynamics of that aren't, you don't feel are yours to to err on everybody else, and I respect that. I think that there's a great honor in even how you talk about it now. But and we'll go on and talk about what happened next in the future and things like that. But I before we do, I want to, in other episodes, people are like, how long is this episode? Well, we'll do that in future episodes. But before we do that, I just want to stop and convey again to you, Jim, my admiration, my thanks for your faithfulness, for your humility, for your obedience, that has set a mark and set an example that my prayers will reverberate in us as leadership for generations to come. I think that the work and the endurance modeled there, and probably some of the worst years of ministry for you, the Lord is redeeming, has redeemed, and will continue to redeem, and actually giving it as a model of what faithfulness and faithful shepherding looks like to all the rest of us.
Speechless. I think that where we are now is the great joy for me. We are rejuvenated. We are exciting again. We are where this church has been in its best days in the past again. Praise God. Praise God for using us. Thank you, I would say, as well, just for being willing to come over and, move in and partner up and go the next generational yard or so.
Yeah.
I every day, every Sunday when I come in here, and now we're starting to go to one of our startup churches, I think, oh my gosh, this idea from 1901 through now, and all the crises, including the one I was in, God just walks this institution, or whatever we call this wonderful body of people through, and the people are great, and the story is, I think, wondrous, amazing to me.
Sure.
And that I'm a part of it is amazing to me. Just stunning. Thanks.
Stunning, such a great word. It really is. Well, we'll continue to get to revel in that, to revel in what he did next. I think in our next episode, we'll actually take a step back and talk about the parallel development of Shoreline Church as it was begun during this same time, as the same time that Jerry was here. Actually, the first church we ever visited when visiting down here was First Baptist. When Jerry was here. Yeah. Tell that story, and then in the following one, tell the story of how these churches came together and what the Lord's done since then. So excited to retrace some of that as we go forward, but particularly excited to get to sit in this with you, to get to both hear you recount it and to get to just praise the Lord for his incredible kindness to this church and to us for getting to be a small piece of it.
Indeed.
Well, thanks again, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you all for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.